As you can see from my Rebel RodCast on YouTube, or any of the emails that I sent out from rebel.rodcast@hotmail.com, you can see that I've put together quite a presentation for my friend at GMA, Kelly Ripa. I noticed that you've had quite a few people on there for your morning coffee show, and I would like to join you on your newscast someday. And this is one of the stories that I'm giving to an aspiring future Attorney General and a woman near and dear to my heart. I've watched her grow her entire life, valedictorian, and just an excellent human being, unscathed by the nastiness of the world. So I'm going to give her 100-year dictation for her synopsis that she can use to get her doctorate and PhD. And it goes something like this, and these are all verifiable facts. In the early to mid-1950s, there were farmers here who had survived the early 1900s, farming the land for generations, much in the style of the James Farm in Lincoln, Missouri. And the railroads that came along to try to annex or take away the James Farm and start one of the biggest English-Irish wars in the history of the United States, because the Englishmen were the bankers and the Irish were the farmers. And the young Irish James, named Jesse, decided to kill 7 bankers. And they sent Pinkertons down and the cavalry and everyone else. And everyone knows how that story goes all the way up into the mid-40s. But about the time that the James family ended with Frank's death in 1945, Annie Ralston wrote a book for the accounts of that treachery, really, against the farmers and settlers of the West, especially in the Lincoln County Wars that continued through the Bonnies and everyone else. But here in Ohio, we had a similar situation develop in the mid-50s when they decided to build roads instead of railroads, and they wanted to build them through farmers' lands again. And so the maps from the survey teams used to take on this enormous project were seen and copied, from what I understood, by our governor, James Rhodes. They called him Dusty Rhodes at the time. And he had ties down here in the Lebanon, Ohio area with a representative named Corwin Nixon. And the Lebanon Citizens National Bank, through George Hinkle, and Miami Cemetery board member John McMahon, who's buried up front by the veterans section near the tank. And so the story goes that these maps were used in a lucrative Trump-style real estate purchase from these farmers, not telling them that they were sitting on, very valuable land. And he went through and bought it up from the farmers, some of them struggling to make it, and some of them filing bankruptcy afterwards. While George Hinkle and his banking scheme investment company took advantage and made all kinds of money, leading the way for our current Senator, Steve Wilson, who was president in Lebanon, where most of this transpired. And the first gas station built was Marathon's pit stop back during the Standard Oil days. And as Standard Oil sold off to British Petroleum, Marathon, and many more, Speedway, a subsidiary of Marathon, bought the gas station's founder's business, which was called Emerald Marketing, and then built a large glass building on I-70 just outside of Indian, Ohio, which was the world headquarters for Speedway, and if I'm not mistaken, racetrack truck stops. Uh, it was quite an achievement for these people from Lebanon, Ohio, who built this pit stop right there on 68, just outside of Lebanon, where you get on and off the ramps of 71 near Mark Hazelwood's Flying J. And what they did, what's illegal, if you take a look at commodities trading laws. Martha Stewart's a great example because she went to prison for insider information on stocks purchasing on Wall Street to have kind of a hedge fund or a head start on an investment because she knew some people in politics. Politicians are allowed to make the purchases, but to my knowledge, George Hinkle and the founders of Emerald Marketing were not politicians. So Corwin Nixon could have purchased it. Dusty Rhodes or James Rhodes, our governor, could have purchased it, but they wouldn't have been allowed to have purchased it. And I'm not sure if you can find someone in real estate law that could explain that to you, because it was the late 50s and early 1960s when all that took place. But the real action didn't start until the Rockefeller sell-off of Standard Oil, where BP went to Cleveland and built, they took over the largest building in Cleveland, painting it pink to let us know that they had arrived, and did quite well, actually, up until the late 90s when they sold off and tried to make jobbers or dealers and sell them off in fractions of four. Most of it bought up by Indian groups and different people who wanted to carry the BP emblem on the signs outside, which devastated them eventually because of the oil spill and public outcry for some immediate attention in Alaska. So now that we've reached this part of the investment strategy where they have purchased building up on 70 and made it the world headquarters for Speedway, I was working there, actually, and got a little bit of that information at the cemetery, so I would be inquisitive, and was lucky enough to have the vice president of Marathon Oil stop in occasionally to aggravate me, and his name was Mr. Seminarelli. And Mr. Seminarelli lived in Springboro, and the maintenance man, Phil, stopped in and told me a little bit about how there was a land purchase long ago, probably around the 60s, by Mr. Seminarelli, and they were building a fuel center, a large speedway on Austin Pike, which was out in the country, nothing but cornfields. And it was quite strange, and he said they're building it just for him personally because no one else is going to shop there. And a few years later, they started construction on what is now Austin Landing. So it would be interesting to know who he bought it from back in the 60s, because they may have a little bit of a gripe to make, if not in court, at least to the American voters, about what kind of underhanded transactions can take place, unless, of course, he told them the value of that property and fully disclosed why he was purchasing it. And he may have purchased it on behalf of the company or its subsidiary, of course, Emerald Marketing. One hand scratches the other, sometimes 20 years, 30 years later. But these are the kind of investments we have to watch for because the American farmer doesn't have a voice. He's not able to say, my family sweated and died on this land, and it finally paid off for them. They knew it. They loved this land for a reason, and here's our payoff. Instead, to have these vultures come in and purchase the land out from under them right before they would have that elation and that feeling knowing their American dream became realized. And that's why we have these laws about insider trading, about watching how financial people maneuver in predatory ways. And that's why they end up with these banks going to Washington on predatory loans that fail and asking taxpayers to bail them out. But why should we bail them out? I mean, take a look at some of the actions they took to get there. Sometimes you just have to pay your own dividends at the end, and it don't work out. And that's kind of where we're at on the American Patriot Act. And I've posted quite a bit about it. There's some financing laws in there that I learned about while working at Speedway that have to do with the financing of terrorism. It is geared more towards Middle Eastern people, which is racist by itself. But when you take a look at it, the largest terrorist act that happened in American history, in my opinion, was an inside job by Donald J. Trump, excluding, of course, September 11th and Pearl Harbor. But it was a terrorist act. It was committed by these white supremacists who wanted to take over the White House, much like they did in Berlin when the chancellor was shot down dead and the Führer, Adolf Hitler, took over right in the middle of Parliament. It's a disgusting act. It seems to be overlooked, seems to be minimized on TV, and actually seems to be starting to fade away now that Donald J. Trump has asked all these people to pay his fines and stuff. If we charge him with terrorism in his White House takeover, all these people that donated $10,000 or more are liable in a court of law criminally for aiding terrorists. And that charge can be treason, and they can be taken out and hung. This is not a joke. This is the law that they passed to get to be able to have all these enhanced surveillance limits removed that Richard Nixon was asked to be resigning for back in the 70s. Now, they changed the laws to fit for what they wanted to do, which was increase the surveillance, as was made poignant to us through Snowden when he left the country because they were chasing him for treason. And I think it would be funny to turn the tables on these legislators and say, look, your lobbyists now are the Snowdens, and we're going to hold them accountable, and we're going to charge them, and we're going to make sure that we get our money's worth on this to make sure that we never hire an imposter to be a president again. This man had no qualifications except for real estate investments and having a cute slogan on TV, "You're fired." His divorce from Marla Maples, the way that he represented himself at the Miss Universe pageants was nothing but disgusting. I think the American voters should be punished who voted for him. And I think that we should take these lobbyists, these rich snobs out here, who like to have a bank in the White House to take advantage of some of the less fortunate people out here in America, and rub their nose in a little bit with a good old execution.